Good day, everyone, and welcome to the webinar series for MBO partners. This is our fourth in the series, and titled today, Understanding Your Consultants, the Top 5 Challenges ICs Face when Engaging with Enterprise Clients. This is, as I said, our fourth in the series of Enterprise Solutions webinars, and we thought we'd have a little different program today. Not following our same protocol, we thought we would bring in some of our consultants and see if they could provide a little insight as to what it really is like being an independent contractor for large enterprise clients. As always, your questions are welcome, and on the right hand of the screen you're going to see that question panel, so feel free to enter questions as they come up and I'll try to address them, or at least at the end of the broadcast I should be able to hit questions, and if not, I will answer them online following up our broadcast. There will be a copy of this presentation available and a recording of this on our website, but we'll send all registrants that copy in a couple of days. Also a reminder just to visit our website and be sure to sign up for the Contractor Engagement Quarterly Newsletter to get regular updates on what's happening in the independent workforce movement, as well as the latest on MBO partners' research, products, and services. A lot of very exciting stuff coming up in the next 30 days, so particular note, if you haven't signed up already, do it now, because there's going to be a lot of good and new information in the next 30 days. So I think we're ready to start our webinar. So let's start kind of setting the stage here a little bit. You know, we've been providing back office administrative services, helping independent contractors engage with their clients for over 25 years. We constantly get letters and comments from our associates about how we've made their lives better, their businesses more successful, generally by relieving them of the part of the consulting business they don't particularly like or particularly can't do well. And that's usually the administrative task. They're an expert in something, some sort of specialized complex field like IT or energy or some sort of consulting field, but they don't necessarily have the time, inclination, or patience to deal with all of the back office, accounting, invoicing, contracts, tax administration, and so on. So if you in the audience have ICs doing work at your company, you probably know it's not always easy getting to do business with your firm. Larger companies, easy to do business with your firm because they've got individuals that are assigned to be your relationship managers and vendor managers. These individuals are businesses of one. They don't have the large stockpile of administrative staff to help do the vetting and contract. They have to do it all themselves, generally speaking. And the more difficult you might make it for them to get engaged with your firm, the more difficult it might be to get the value that you really expect. And in the long term, we've heard that about 46% of companies tell us that they have lost talent because they've got a cumbersome process of getting people engaged. So today we brought in two of our long-term associates to share with us some of their experiences, and I've sat down with them before this webinar and gotten some good input as to what they believe the top 5 challenges are. And they're going to speak to you as potential clients or clients of MBO, and the hope is that you could get a little insight as to how to make your program and your assignments and projects more attractive so you are a client of choice. So let me move forward with our introduction. So I'm Jay Lash, Vice President of Market Strategies and your host of these webinars. The two consultants we've brought in today are very special people for MBO. Actually, Robert Weber has been one of our Meet the Independents section of our website to share some of the experiences so you get a detailed background of Robert. He's a senior SAP technology specialist. He's worked in IT and manufacturing for 35 years. He's APIC certified on 2 levels. He specializes specifically with large companies needing to manage their data volume through data prevention, data archiving, data destruction, keeping their systems lean, and meeting all financial legal requirements at the same time as mitigating the risks. So, Robert, glad to have you on board.
Glad to be here, Jay.
Thanks. And we also have David Shikari. David is of Wisconsin, and he's a senior electrical project engineer. He's worked in the nuclear energy field for over 30 years. He's a registered engineer and certified project management professional. With his experience, he's been working at nuclear plant startups as well as modifications. David does plants electrical modification packages for security and cyber protection. His current or most recent assignment is utilizing his new cybersecurity engineer certification. So a truly up-and-coming field and a true valued partner for all of us in the country, having him watch all over our nuclear power plants. David, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Well, it's good to have you guys because this perspective is something I believe a lot of our clients and managers at the companies we deal with don't often get a chance to do sort of a debrief with their ICs. They don't necessarily get a exit interview, and they don't necessarily get a feedback survey or anything. So they may not really know some of these things are as challenging to their consultants as they are. So let's start with the first challenge, and what you guys have told me might be one of the bigger ones is that of vendor approval process bureaucracy. Now, these might involve things like the financial systems you need to enter your project deliverables or payment requirements and invoicing. Maybe it's business liability insurance requirements. Sometimes could be fairly egregious with multi-million-dollar policies. The vetting process itself to go through, whether it be drug and background screening, criminal checks, what have you. And then there's a setup, a W-9, and a number of things that, again, can add to the complexity. So I'm going to start with you, Robert. I think you brought this up first. So you've been a consultant for a number of years. Why does this challenge meet the top of your list?
Well, one of the things that I find when seeking new opportunities is the ability to just get to the ultimate hiring manager with my skill sets becomes a very difficult task. First of all, there are some companies that we find that you need to be on an approved vendor list before you're even able to submit, or other companies have to work through a managed service provider. So each time you go through a different tier of layers, it just becomes much more cumbersome and finally getting to the right person so you can present your skill sets. So that's been one of the most difficult things that I have faced, East Coast, West Coast, seems like everywhere. And big companies just, I know they have a lot of internal requirements they need to meet, but we would just appreciate if somehow the job could just be made easier for us to be able to submit our requirements to your particular needs. And so one of the things that we thought about is even perhaps a suggestion from big companies would be just to maybe put out there an FAQ, frequently asked questions process by a vendor. If we want to come to your company, what are the steps we have to go through, and who do we need to contact in order to be able to submit?
Great idea. There's a lot to be said for these intermediaries, the vendor manager and some of the managed service providers, or maybe a project management office internally run at the company. We know that they provide a lot of value to the organization. The one thing that we often find is they forget that independents operate on a little different schedule. They don't have the depth that perhaps bigger companies have. So they might have a consulting agreement, for example, or a professional services process. It's very fine for larger firms, but very cumbersome for the smaller firms. So these intermediaries need to make accommodations, and I think that's a great suggestion. Have an FAQ, a defined process that you could look up online and follow the process. At least you know the roadmap, the navigation to get approval. David, you've also, with energy companies, there's a lot of controls, obviously, in place for security and other things. you found it cumbersome. What do you think might be done to improve that process and make it easier to get approved as a vendor?
First of all, it takes a long time, and it's just almost like forever to get something going. So it'd be nice if they have, like if you worked for them before or something, they had a predefined group of people, your name is already there, they already done the background check, they know you. So, and then you know what needs to be done. That way it makes it a lot easier and faster to get to work. Because I know they want you as soon as possible, but then they have to do a lot of background checks, a lot of different things. And that makes it harder and takes a long time. So if you be part of a predefined group of people, they already done that, and then that makes it a lot easier for them and for everybody. They come back to quickly and say, oh, okay, we already have this guy working for us before. He's already been checked. He's in our system. We can easily get him back in and get him working, so it won't take so long to do that, And I agree with Robert, what he said, exactly the same thing, just over and over,
So you're suggesting, and I like the idea. In fact, I'll share a little insight in a second. But what you're describing is sort of a database or a talent bank of independent consultants that a company might use on a regular basis. It doesn't have to be, on a continuous basis, but year after year you might get them in on projects. Have them pre-vetted, if you would, pre-approved, get them ready to go to work so that when the timing does come up and there is an interaction and agreement to start work, that isn't when you begin that process and then slow down their ability to actually go to work. That's basically what you're saying. Have you found companies use that approach at all?
Well, yeah, like in FPA, I mean, I've worked for some power companies. If I'm in their system, and stuff like takes 2 weeks to get into a computer system. If you've been there before, it takes 1 day.
Yeah.
You see, that's 2 weeks saving. You're sitting there doing nothing, And
and of course, they usually don't call you and say, I want you to start in a month. It's usually pretty immediate. So, yeah, that would be tremendously helpful. MBO is actually going to be announcing later on in September new product being a project platform where companies can actually load up technology-enabled database of their already vetted, curated consultants that are ready to go to work. And it would make it a lot easier for the company to re-engage and as well post new projects to their consultant database, or what we're calling the virtual bench of consultants. So great input, guys, on number 1. Let's look at challenge number 2. Although it's commonly said, show me the money, right? Everybody's looking for, the best rate, the best terms, but sometimes negotiating those terms, including the expenses, how the rates are calculated, whether it be hourly or fixed price or milestone based, is there a payment cycle that you have to meet that might require a long wait between the time you get engaged and ultimately get paid? And then how are your expenses to be handled? I think sometimes the misnomer is that if you've got an independent consultant, you should get an all-inclusive rate, and certainly from a compliance standpoint, that probably makes it easier to prove that an individual is an independent consultant. But is it always the best way to get the best result and ultimately the best bottom line price? David, you've got a strong client following, and you've got people that have used you many times, so I'm sure you have sort of a routine, but you still face this as a challenge. Kind of explain how you've worked with this as a challenge.
Well, usually, I'm not a lawyer. I can't go through all this stuff trying to figure out and haggle on the money and this and that. But that's the reason I got to the MBO, because they do the work for me, and it makes it a lot easier, and they have a transparency. So everything's up in front. I know what's going on, what my billing rate is, how it's going to be, where it's going to, and how it gets divided. Especially if you have a wife as an accountant, she wants every number counts.
Yeah.
So you're basically stuck, So bottom line is money, and if you look, and then okay, and then a lot of things, managed service providers, they don't have that transparency. They give you some money, but you don't know what they're getting for you. And that makes it kind of hard, so that's one of the hang-ups, that my wife had said, they pay you a lot of money to somebody else, and they pay you, and then in the middle, you get kind of like a middleman, getting a lot of money, and you're not getting the thing, So that's what,
Yeah.
you know, and makes it a lot easier. And then, you know, so that's what the MBO said me at ease, because it's transparent. Everything's up there. I see exactly what's going on, where everything goes, how it comes, you know, so that way there's no question asked.
Great solution. Go to MBO. David, you mentioned a couple of things when we were talking about this that have to do with the expenses. And a lot of your work is outside of your local area. How have you handled that dimension of this whole negotiation of payment terms and expenses?
That's the hardest thing. That's, you know, the patient, the time, and then you try to work it. That's the thing that MBO takes care of it. I'll send my expenses to MBO, and it's all go ahead and fixed up and goes right to the company and comes right back. It's all computerized. Everything's taken care of. I don't have to
And
worry
you see
about
it all on your your business center.
Exactly. Everything's all in there. You know, and my wife loves that. She's an accountant. She can just bring your screen up. It sees everything, where money goes, where it comes, you know. So that way she's off my back. That's just, you can't put a price on that.
Priceless. Robert, you also dealt with these expenses. Talk to me about some of the solutions you've seen work.
Well, it's always a challenge when you're applying for a new position as to whether the rate is inclusive or exclusive of expenses. And therefore, that will have a difference on the impact of what we're submitting as a rate. What I found to be very successful, and the client has been willing to work with me, is to become a little bit creative with the expenses. And by that I mean that I will take a regular hourly rate for the service that I perform, but then I will work with the company to try to keep the expenses as low as possible and as fair as possible. So we become very creative in you know, things like hotels that, for instance, when I go to a new city, you know, I'll ask if they already have established agreements with either hotels or apartments that I can use that rate rather than me going out and try to negotiate on my own.
Yeah, great point. And usually large companies not only have those arrangements, but might even have direct billing.
Right. Yep. I've had that instance. Another situation is car rental. There have been times where I've made an agreement with my customer that I will drive, the first time I will drive to the location and use my car rather than rent a car. And back and forth air travel is necessary, but just avoid the expense of the car rental every week, because that can be pretty expensive if you're going on a week-by-week or a month-by-month basis. And I've also had situations where I've worked with a customer where many times at a big company they have their own travel department or their own travel agency, and they would book the planes and the fares for me, and that way I could take advantage of their particular negotiated rate. And so the bottom line is that by using these creative ways, it saves both the customer and myself these additional costs, and those savings then are passed along to the customer.
Yeah, and I think you're talking about collaborating, you know, making it less of a negotiation and more of a back and forth collaboration. I think that's kind of the core behind all of this. If you could break down that barrier as buyer and seller and get into more of a collaborative environment where you're working together to solve a problem and ultimately get a lower cost out of your relationship, I think those are all huge advantages for a company to take on. I'm going to ask you guys just each to give me an answer to this one question. Typical payment terms, cycle of which or time which you have to wait to get paid. What's normal and what would you think is fair? David?
The company is like 50 normally, but I like the 2 weeks. But again, I put up with it. I have to manage it, you know.
Yeah, so you say it's not unusual to get close to 2 months of a payment term, but you'd like to see closer to 14 days.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Robert?
30 days is pretty comfortable with me. My current client, which is BMW, sometimes pays within 20 to 30 days, and they're always on time. So you can count on them. They're always dependable, and it just makes our lives so much easier to depend upon.
So I guess you might say that BMW in your book is designed for designed for your kind of a relationship. So this is not unusual maybe, but it's certainly preferred in your case to get that kind of a turnaround.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, let's go to number 3 challenge, and you guys had a lot of input on this particular one. So it's fulfilling the skill set demand, and essentially what we're describing here is maybe a series of what I would consider to be unattainable job requirements. They want the sun, moon, and the stars in the background, and the culture and everything built into one. Maybe it's not the right mix. So if you're looking for somebody who's very articulate, outgoing, and make presentations, but is also an engineer, physicist, accountant, maybe it's not going to happen all that much. But there's something that you need to realize when writing up your requirements, and that is that they need to be achievable. But they also need to be clear. And a statement of work is a great way to present that and ultimately communicate with your consultant what's expected in the job, and also how to identify who's qualified and who's not, and then self-identify so the consultants can see if they really can achieve what you're expecting. These realistic expectations, if they're clearly spelled out, in the beginning of the project and the end of the project are, you can expect, or you can have realistic expectations getting into the job. And I think what you guys have told me, and that's why I'd like you to get a little bit more input, is that a lot of times these projects haven't been scoped out well enough. So maybe that's what's behind a lot of this. They're throwing a lot of words out there hoping something would stick. David, I think Robert, I think you came up with this one first. What is it that you see that often happens with these rushed out statements of work and no scoping? And then what do you do about it?
Okay, well, in my case, I'm in a very specialized field within SAP, and many times the company will recognize that they have a big data problem, and how do they solve it as quickly as possible. So the project manager understands that we need to get somebody in to help them deal with this issue, and so they'll put out a requirement, but they don't really understand the level of detail or the requirements that are specifically needed, and so that what comes out as is requirements that are either unclear or they're a standard boilerplate for somebody in IT. And many of these skill sets that are really needed for this specific requirement aren't even delineated. So what normally happens is once I get through the bureaucracy and talk to the actual hiring manager, it ends up, more cases than not, that I end up interviewing the manager exactly what their needs are, what are you looking for, what's the current situation. And so after I interview the client and understand the exact need, then I'm in a better position to come back with a proposal or an idea of what's required. So my suggestion would be going forward, and I've used this successfully at a number of companies, is to go through a discovery process and actually do an assessment up front where you could bring someone in like me for a day or two and say, here's our system, take a look at it, diagnose it, what do you see, what are some things that we ought to be thinking about, and then out of that assessment we can really put together a very solid, detailed statement of work, scope that has to be accomplished, and then whether I'm the ultimate person to do it or the next person comes in really has a solid understanding of what is required. But a lot of times what I see is just a very generic labeling and not being able to fully understand exactly what the customer is looking for.
Yeah, and it does quite often come to time, right? They didn't necessarily know they needed this. They add this in at the end. They bring the consultant in, maybe had Deloitte or some large firm in there, and they know they need a very specific expertise, so they go out and they get somebody like you, but nobody's really done the work because they haven't had the time to really scope it out. So you're willing to do a 1 or 2 day kind of project? Is that gratis, or do you charge for that?
It can be negotiated. Either way, I've done it both ways, and every time I've done it, it's been successfully ended up in the project. But I mean, I will do it gratis if if that's what the need is.
Yeah, I think it benefits you as well as the client, right? To know there's a good match and know that the demands are realistic and can be achieved. David, you mentioned that this happens to you as well. What do you see as being one of the solutions to maybe take this rush job requirement and assignment and make it a little bit more understandable?
I usually go and work with them, trying to write the statement and work with them and document everything. So that way they know exactly what I can provide them and what I will provide them, and they know what they're going to get, and I know I can do it. A lot of time I get lucky, they tell me, that other plan you did that security work, we want exactly the same thing. Oh, no problem. Can they pass inspection with their flying color? Can you copy it over here? No problem, I can do that, stuff like this. So that would make it, and it's the experience, But again, working with them, documenting everything that they're looking for, so they know exactly what they're going to get, and that up front. The hardship I have up front is better than that later on, if you get out of a problem. This way everybody understands what needs to be done, and everybody be happy.
Yeah, it's so key. That's a great point about documentation. I guess sometimes we think, and I say we, as engagement manager, you might think that what you're passing on is enough information for a client, for a consultant to identify their skills and whether they could do the job. But it doesn't serve as a long-term means of documentation. So maybe what happens is after the initial requirement is listed and you've got the right person, you sit down, as David said, and really fine-tune that statement of work before it begins, document, get complete understandings, define actual milestones and deliverables that should be connected with this project, see where it actually fits into the bigger project, as they all do, and make sure that they align with their timeline so you're not rushed around to deliver on something that you didn't expect to. So everybody ends up with a lot better product at the end. Do you guys work with project schedules a lot? Do you get that in advance?
Yeah, always. I'm just David. A lot of time I walk into a company and say, "Where have you been?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You're 3 months late." Okay, give me the schedule. Let me see what it is, because they delayed it, And I've had that many times. I'm always behind because they hired me because it took so long to hire me. And then I have to really rush through and work a lot of long hours to catch up and get them going. And they told me, do whatever it takes. In 3 months, we got to get this project done. Okay.
So you just said it, and I think you just said it. If you don't have the project schedule at the front end, how can you be expected to meet those requirements? So project schedules, I think, are also another very important component of that documentation.
Yeah, you have to have that.
All right, we're going to move to challenge number 4. So I'm going to give you a little background on this one before, while you look at this wonderful yoga pose on the screen. So what we're really referring to when thinking of this challenge is there are a lot of requirements for a consultant to meet all of their customer demands, and sometimes you're balancing a few clients at the same time. Sometimes you have to work when the system's shut down or when no one's using the system. Sometimes you have to work, odd hours or odd locations, and the flexibility required to balance your life as well as to meet your clients' demands can require a lot more flexibility than some companies are willing to put up there. So one thing is, where is the work expected to be performed? Does it have to be performed on site? Can it be done remotely? Can it be done online? Is the client a micromanager? Maybe they're asking you to report in, to phone in or complete reports maybe too frequently, maybe even get involved in meetings that will take valuable time and you'll be billing for that you're really not getting any value out of. And that's the kind of flexibility I think we're thinking of. And Robert, I'm pretty sure it was you who said it all comes down to trust. And if the client's used you a lot of times, they don't ask you to come on site and do the work. They just say, I need this by January 1st or whatever, and you could work with that. But you don't always have the luxury of working with an established client. So tell us what this challenge means to you.
Well, it's certainly understandable that when a company brings in a consultant that they've never worked with before, they want to make sure that they are getting exactly what they're paying for. So it's understandable from our perspective that they would want to make sure that they've got the right person, the person can do the job properly, and that they can trust them within their system. So that usually takes a bit of time to develop that trust. It doesn't come overnight, but usually within a month or two after working with a client, you can, and even before that, you can tell if it's a good fit or not. And if you're able to then prove to the customer that, yes, indeed, you can do this work, and yes, indeed, it's being done correctly, and here's some of the initial results, then that trust then can be extended, and the flexibility to not have to be on site 40 hours a week can be established. So normally what we would prefer to do, at least in my situation, is to be able to, first of all, be there, put names to faces, work with people, establish that kind of rapport so that if you do need a phone call or a conference that you know who they are. But ultimately, it's making sure that, we're both on the same page. They've got a task that needs to be done, and we're bringing the skill sets to get it done. And, giving us that flexibility is critical. In my case, as I said, with SAP, there's a number of times that I can only work on the systems when the production facility is not up and running. So therefore, I do spend nights, holidays, weekends, those kind of times, working on the system when nobody is around. And so the trust factor is there that you'll get the work done. Yeah, you're going to have to perhaps work some odd hours and odd days, but it will get done, and they can benefit they can see the benefits and the results. So it's more or less just that flexibility to be able to work at home or work remotely as required, and once that is established, and I've done for some clients, I'm able to realistically drop my rate about 20% because I don't have to spend the time traveling. I don't have to spend airfare and car fare and all the hotels and all the other incidentals that go along with it. So it kind of goes back to our earlier point that if we're looking to establish a low rate and still get a superior service provided, if we can collaborate and work together, in my situation, I'm normally able to drop my rate by 20% if we can work remote.
Yeah, you bring up so many good points there, Robert, and it's funny how, as you were speaking, I was thinking of numerous instances where those things have occurred. If an individual sees you as a client of choice and the consultant wants to do work with you because you are flexible, because you give them that ability to maybe take on some other projects while you're working, not have to show up to company meetings or on site and do the work remotely, work at night, not necessarily all during the day. Those things have value to consultants, especially when you're, in that position in life when you've got other things that you want to achieve. You're writing a book, you want to go to conferences, you have grandchildren you want to see. Those are things that are valuable. So that's a good way to keep that rate in a managed fashion. So it's not, always market-driven rates. It's actually an individual rate because you've been flexible. So I think it's an awesome point that clients need to grab hold of.
And it's also beneficial. It's also beneficial to the company, Jay, because again, in my situation, there's instances where I can't do my work on a normal 40-hour week when production is running because the systems are tied up. So, the company's saying, we want to get the work done, but give me the flexibility to do it on nights, holidays, and weekends, benefits both of us.
Yeah. So, David, you run into things where trust might be a factor. I know you have a very loyal clientele, and they probably know you pretty well in the industry, but talk to us a little bit about this flexibility.
Well, always, wherever I go, I'm the new kid on the block. Everybody looking at me, what can I do for them,
Mm-hmm.
So, I always tell them performance and time bring trust. When I start showing my work, they see what's going on and take baby steps, and be patient with them before you know it, The client is comfortable and enough to be more flexible with me. And I get them because I tell them my goal is make you happy. Whatever it takes. Then they have rules and regulations that I have to work with. But as soon as they see the performance and they see things are getting done, they say, oh, I don't care how you do it, just get it done. And that's just establish that trust. You got to be patient. to get that going, and they're responsible to get the job done. You want to make sure that the job is getting done, and when you show them some results, and they go, oh, okay, no problem, I'm not worried about you anymore. If they want, and I'm always available to they can get a hold of me, so they know they can talk to me if the question, problem comes up, so that way they feel good that they can talk to me anytime anything comes up, you know. So make yourself available, you know, by your cell phone, whatever, you know, emails, you know, that one, and you show them some results, and before you know it, they listen to you, they tell you, hey, tell us what you want, and we do get done, how flexible you want to be.
So I like your formula. So performance plus time equals that trust, and trust is what's going to get you that flexibility. So I think that's a good formula to succeed.
And patient, you gotta be patient. You know, you can't be overnight, you know. It takes a few days, a few weeks, depending on the project, how it is, and everything, you know.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Let me add one more dimension. Sometimes the client is a little concerned, especially in the type of work you're doing, where you're getting into systems and access to facilities that only their employees have. So, Robert, I think you had recommended maybe you put something up front, like an NDA?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I usually try to establish, since I go into systems, companies' SAP systems, I normally, because of the type of work I do, I have access to their financials, their sales, their deliveries, their customer base, just about everything that is required in order to run their business. And so I want them to understand and to make sure that I take that very, very seriously. And so what I will always ask up front is I would like to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, with you, just to make sure that you're comfortable that I'm not going to take any information that's proprietary or useful for any of your competitors to them, so that, you know, they can feel the sense of security that they're dealing with a professional who understands all these sorts of things, but the trust factor in that nothing is going to get out about your company.
You know, you're actually saying something that it almost appears too obvious, but it's worth mentioning. As a consultant with a specialized field like you have, it's very likely that you're dealing with all of these companies' competitors. So whatever company you're dealing with, you're also dealing with their competitors. The NDA gives them a certain sense of security, but also I think your professionalism and the way you handle that and put that up front gives them the sense that you're going to take this seriously. You're not going to go from company A to company B and share secrets, and you'll respect the proprietary nature of the work and the information that you get. So great to put that up front. I like the advice. All right, let's move to the last one. This might be one of the more complex, and maybe I think you know, David said he's not a lawyer. Might have an accountant for a wife, but you still, you know, you're not a lawyer. So contracts are very difficult to see through. Contracts sometimes are what I might be considered irrelevant because they were set up for some other sort of agreement, and the client really only has a series of boilerplate approved agreements to start with. So you're not really signing something that's specific to your circumstance. Sometimes there are clauses in there that are designed specifically to protect the company, and maybe another large company can deal with that, but as an individual you may be signing off certain rights that are unrealistic and unfair. I've also seen, when it comes to intellectual property, that there's a lot of companies that have engaged their attorneys that specialize in IP law, and they build contract terms that almost put you in a position where the work that you bring into the project has been actually turned over to the client. So that's obviously, I don't think anybody's intention, but it's an overzealous legal contract department that might have written something in that can't be followed. So my suggestion, and I think you guys have all come up with a variety of things, certainly use somebody like MBO who will do the negotiating for you. But besides that, what do you recommend these clients do to make it a little bit easier for you to engage in a contract negotiation? Robert, let's start with you.
Well, one of the things that I do very early up front when I go into a new client is I explain to them that I have this relationship with MBO and that I would really like to make sure that that's a critical part of my decision-making process. The reason I say that is kind of what you alluded to earlier, is that in our situation, we're just one or two people within this company, and so therefore, we don't have a lot of these skill sets in the legal sense of the world. And so to me, it was critical when I signed on with MBO to know that, here's an organization that understands these legal requirements on both sides, because they're dealing with a lot of companies, but they're also dealing with a lot of individuals. So therefore, they've worked out a lot of these issues and know how to deal with them. But my biggest fear and concern starting out as independent was, would there be some legal language that I would be signing on that I didn't even know existed out there? And so it was very comforting to me to be able to work with MBO, who was acting on my behalf. And also, I've seen work very hand in hand with my client to be able to establish that relationship. The other thing that I want to bring out to your clients, Jay, is that another big part of my signing on with MBO, and that I also pass on to my clients when I'm getting ready to go into their system, is that MBO does provide contractor liability insurance for me. That was another expense that I may have to incur, but I felt it was important, especially when I'm dealing with a company's day-to-day activities in their data, that if for some unforeseen situation that something would happen, that we do have liability insurance out there. As I've talked to some of my associates who are also independent contractors, not all of them have that liability insurance, and I'm very quick to indicate to them that that's a pretty important thing to have. And again, I like to pass that on to my customers because I want them to have the assurance that this insurance is in place and is out there protecting everyone.
It's common in a business-to-business relationship that you would expect your vendor to have insurance coverage. So it's not unrealistic for a company to think that an individual who's doing business as a business of one should have that insurance. So that I think all understand. At the same time, though, are the coverages realistic, and is it something that an individual can afford? Now, of course, MBO does have a broader range and higher level than most typical individuals, but individuals often do have to buy their own insurance if they're operating independently, and if they do, it could be a huge expense and will figure ultimately into your rate. So I think that's a great point, and I think it's one worth noting as a client of choice. Are your demands for your independent consultants made somewhat easier or waived in some cases, so that the insurance requirements and other legal clauses are really relevant to the job at hand? And David, again, you're in situations that are highly regulated with probably government clients that don't really have a lot of room for negotiation on a contract. This is what everybody signs, so just sign it. How do you deal with this, and what do you recommend in your environment?
Yeah, I'm an engineer. Until next year, my daughter graduates from USC, law degree. I need to be having like MBO, somebody to look after things like this. See, I'm specialized in fighting cyber ninjas. I ain't got time to sit down and read negotiation clause and this and that, So I need to have somebody like you guys that have been in and out all the time doing this, take care of that for me. I just only specialize in what I specialize in my work. And I want peace of mind that you guys taking care of that and you know what's going on with it. And I do the paperwork with you guys, and you guys take care of the rest of it. And another thing I like about you guys, the MBO, is the transparency. Everything's out in the open. Everything is there. You should see everything anytime you want. What contract you sign, what exactly in there. And I've worked with some managed service provider that some of the stuff was, like they wouldn't tell us. It was just something they said, we can't let you know, and it's a secret, So wait a minute now, what is this, So, and that makes a big difference to me, And then that gives me ease of mind, so that I go ahead and fight my cyber ninjas and make sure everybody's safe.
So, it's something to note in what you said about the managed service providers or other intermediaries. In those scenarios, the contract is actually between that provider and the client. And then you have a contract with the provider or the MSP. Those terms may not always flow down. So it's important that you have somebody that could decipher those requirements and understand what you're really signing up to, because you may not be signing up to the terms with that client. You may be signing up to terms with their provider. So that does make a difference sometimes. I'd also note, and I think it's worth your comment, both of you, that when you are reviewing these sort of contracts, I mean, we have contracts with probably 2,000 companies, master service agreements, about 35% of the Fortune 100. And these are obviously complex documents, but the difference is we've already gone through the process of signing what's the right document, what's the appropriate clauses, which red lines apply to a consultant versus a larger firm or a multi-service provider. So it does make it a little bit easier to ferret out what is relevant and what is applying to you and not. But in your situations, both of you, do you ever get asked to sign a contract that literally cannot be negotiated, that cannot be altered at all?
No, I would not sign a contract unless, I've had the legal issues worked out by MBO. It's just too much of a risk for me.
Yeah, that's a great. Let's face it. I think where we're all coming from, the client as well as MBO and the independent consultants, is that we want to do a good job. We want to have a good reference. We want to make sure the client's happy. We want to make sure everybody gets what's expected. At the same time, on that very same breath, we have to recognize that there is legal and regulatory demands that have to go into these relationships. So sometimes, as David says, the transparency is more important. Is it out there? Can I see it? Can I review it with you? Can we discuss it? If that's not available, then you're going to be suspicious. There's something in there that is not going to be agreeable, that might be a little bit difficult to meet, and ultimately, if things go wrong, only the company's interests are being protected. So I think we're all on the same page. Everybody wants their right of protection. Good point, David. Transparency. Let's put it all up front and talk it through. I'm signing on closing a house in about 24 hours, and the process you go through, reviewing documents and looking at all the information before it's actually signed and getting advice and making sure that you're not committing to something that you couldn't follow through on, I think is something, especially when the government gets involved, gets a little bit, a little bit overreacting, but at the same time, it seems necessary. And I think contract negotiations can be the same way.
The fine
Any
print
last
can
comments
get you.
on that? What's that?
The fine print can get you.
Yeah, and the fine print sometimes is as bold as the the other print. You just need to find it and understand it.
Yes.
All right, so let me see if I could just pose a couple of quick questions for you guys. One question, about maybe another challenge is the whole idea that companies may require that you work on a position that might be equal to or comparable to a full-time or a staff aug temporary worker. So you're a consultant, yet you're doing the job what appears to be of an individual contributor to the company. If that ever happens, how do you help delineate that so there isn't that blurry line and that you have a business relationship versus an individual relationship? Robbie, do you want to take a crack at that one?
Well, I mean, you have to understand that there is a difference between an employee and a contractor. And so I've always tried to maintain that relationship, separate that relationship in such a way that, I don't get involved in a lot of the things that a normal employee would be, like going to employee meetings and those kind of things. Not business meetings, but I mean employee meetings, employee type activities, so that I just think there has to be that separation between an employee and a contractor. Not that we don't want to be friendly and helpful and enjoy the experience, but we're there to do a specific job, get it done, and hopefully transfer that knowledge to somebody so that they can carry on after that. But we got to maintain that independence.
Yeah, very good point. And it's a popular thing. We're getting more and more. Our data is showing that the request to work independently is creating kind of a blurry line. More and more companies are doing their own sourcing. We hear that 30% increase over last year, companies sourcing their own independent consultants and their own temporary workers. So there can be a lot of that blurring. So you're really one of the important parts of that relationship. You got to continually drive that you're a business relationship, not an employee relationship, how you behave and what you expect. David, I'm going to pose you another question because we're going to run out of time, and I got one more question. What do you see as the advantages to working on an hourly plus expenses versus a fixed price and deliverable basis?
The thing is, a lot of times it's variable. The problem they gave you, it's not what you're going to end up fixing. There's other stuff that comes up. There's always a can of worms you open up and say, oh my God, Like I look at the project, they gave me a bunch of drawings, and it's supposed to take 1 week to do it, but then when you look at another drawing, it's correct. Everything is just not the way it's supposed to be. It's not as built the way it's supposed to be. Configuration management is out the door. So you have to start from the scratch and trying to build everything up. So that's the reason I like hourly a lot better, because especially they agree with me because they know their system is not 100% and drawings are not correct. So I like to go with hourly so they know what I'm doing. That would give me peace of mind. I don't have to worry about getting stuck with something that can't get done.
Yeah. To me, what you're kind of saying in that description is that if you've done a really good job scoping the project and you know exactly what needs to be done, then maybe you have a chance at a fixed price deliverable project. If not, at least have it milestone based and payment per milestone. If you're going to go hourly and expenses, it's probably because there's a lot of unknowns, the time isn't clear, and maybe even the level of effort isn't clear. So these are things that might draw you to more of a fixed price, an hourly plus expenses, time and materials sort of a rate.
A lot of clients I work with, they know that configuration control is no good. They know that. So they can't promise me the correct drawing. So what do? They understand it. But then that's the problem. That's what the crux of the work here, that nothing is a configuration, control correct. So you have to go start from scratch. So that's the reason to go that way.
Yeah, and that's going to obviously change. Scope creep could be a bit of an enemy on those scenarios.
There's always a can of worms you open up.
I'm gonna ask for just a few minutes more of your time, gentlemen, and maybe kind of summarize for us parting advice. You're talking to a client. Maybe imagine you're talking to a client that you've worked with in the past, and you have a chance now to say, how could you make this assignment, these projects, other consultants' relationships improve? What can you do to make it better? David, let's start with you.
I try to find some highly qualified independent consultant for yourself or through MBO and hang on to them to get the work done. It makes life a lot easier, and then you find, it's right now getting harder and harder to find good qualified people. And I have my brother in Houston has a company. He said he can't find enough people, good people that work for him. And then I always try to insist on transparency. Make sure everything's out and open, everything, your background, company requirement, everything, And again, I insist on documentation. Can't say enough about it because the document all require every requirement, every expectation and there's no room for misunderstanding, And I suggest to everybody, it is better to take the time up front and make sure that you got the right IC for the job before you hire him or her, and then go back and do the whole process all over because he or she was not the right person for a job. That just wastes a lot of time and effort and just not worth it.
So invest the time up front and get the job spec'd out properly so you've got the right person assigned. Make sure you've documented it, you're clearly communicating, and it's transparent what the relationship is all about.
Exactly. There's a more hardship you have up front, the harder, the better is at the end, because that way things get done the way it's supposed to be.
Great. Thank you, David. Robert, parting advice, how would you summarize your advice to clients?
Okay, well, 3 points. One, we just have to streamline the hiring process. I think we talked about that early on, that just the bureaucracy to get through that, if there's a way to simplify that process, it sure makes everything go quicker, and we're on site ready to start work a whole lot faster than being tied down in some sort of paperwork or obstacle. Second, what I like to ask my clients is that we have an upfront assessment, like you had mentioned earlier, that I can go in and look at your system and within 2 days or 3 days diagnose exactly where you are, what your situation is, and from that then develop a clear SOW, so that, as David just mentioned, that we are having a full understanding exactly what's required, what is the condition that we're walking into, and what can be expected from it. And then thirdly, I would say just collaboration with the independent contractor in regards to scheduling flexibility and expense reduction. I think if we're in that kind of a business relationship where both sides are looking to get the job done fairly, but yet keep the expenses down as much as possible, work with your IC, and I think together you can come up with some ways to really keep those expenses down, and obviously the long-term cost of the project.
Great. Yeah, all sound advice. I hope our clients are listening and be able to glean some of this. Being a client of choice is very similar to the way in the employment brand you want to be an employer of choice, right? You don't want to find talent and then find out you couldn't get them to agree to start. Maybe some of these ICs you get involved with, ultimately you might want to bring on as a full-time employee, and they may be interested in dedicating a full-time assignment. Most ICs want to stay ICs. We understand about 80% have every expectation to continue. But either way, they're consumers. They're people that will speak to your product, your brand. So you want to make sure they're happy. And we always say that there is risk involved. MBO works very hard to mitigate the risk of bringing on independent contractors, but there's nothing more risky than an unhappy contractor. So keep that in mind. You're focusing on a good return on investment for your contractor dollar. Gentlemen, I appreciate your input and the time that you took not only to help me prepare the top 5, but to contribute for this webinar. So, Robert, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And David, thank you. We appreciate your input.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And we have one more webinar coming up in our series shortly, and that will be a webinar based on human resources, recruitment, sourcing, and engagement. So how is human resources actually sourcing and engaging these independent contractors? We're going to get some HR professionals on as guests, and they're going to talk about why they've invested so much more time now in recruiting their own temporary help, as well as other contingent freelancer and consulting relationships. So should be a very interesting webinar. Thank you, everybody on the phone, for joining, and we are going to do our best to get the copy of this recording out on our website and give you a copy of this. Also, if you're one of those staffing industry analyst members, we are going to be in Chicago on the 9th through the 12th at the Staffing Industry Analyst Solutions Forum and Contingent Workforce Strategies Summit. We'll be hosting a nice event on the 10th. Hopefully, you've gotten some information regarding that. If you haven't, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll make sure you get an invitation. It should be a great conference, and we'll be there not only doing some workshops and some demos, but also meeting with individuals one-on-one and talking about what's new in the independent workforce movement. Also, stay tuned for our State of Independence research report. Will be out later on next month. And again, some exciting announcements coming up on new products for MBO. So again, thank you all, and we'll catch you next time.